The rain had turned the road into a ribbon of black glass, headlights sliding past like ghosts. I stood in his doorway, wet hair clinging to my face, my breath shallow but steady. We didn't speak. The air between us felt heavier than the storm outside, humming with all the words we'd never dared to say. His eyes held mine, steady, searching, and for a moment the rest of the world blurred. The clock in the hallway ticked loud enough to cut through the rain, counting down to something neither of us could name. We leaned in, or maybe the house itself tilted us toward each other, until there was barely an inch left. A sudden sound split the moment. Tires crunching in the gravel outside. Headlights flooding the porch. My chest tightened as reality yanked me back. I stepped away before the door even opened, before my heart caught up. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? It started with the envelope. That morning had been as unremarkable as any, coffee brewing in the kitchen, my husband seated at the head of the table reading USA Today, complaining about the rising price of gas like it was a personal insult. The sky was pale and dry, and the air smelled faintly of the neighbor's freshly cut grass. The mail came in the usual stack: bills, a catalog from Kohl's, some glossy real estate flyers. And then there it was, a plain manila envelope, no return address, slightly thicker than the rest. I almost didn't notice it, almost shoved it in with the bills. But something about the way it had been placed, on top of everything else, like it wanted to be noticed, made me slip it under the crossword section of the paper. I didn't open it. Not yet. I tucked it into my purse before my husband could glance up, pretending to be preoccupied with the coffee machine that hissed and sputtered like it was about to quit on us. Later, in the Target parking lot, I sat in my car with the engine running, heat blasting against the damp chill that had rolled in. The envelope tore open too easily. Inside were several photographs, me and my husband, smiling at a backyard barbecue last summer, walking hand in hand down Main Street during the Christmas parade, him at the grill wearing that ridiculous Kiss the Cook apron his best friend had given him as a joke. But the last photo made my stomach twist. It was him, my husband, leaning in far too close to a woman I didn't recognize. Her hand was resting on his arm. His smile was soft, not the public one, but the private kind I thought was mine alone. I drove aimlessly for almost an hour after that. Past the diner with the neon pie sign, the church with the fading God Loves You banner, the small park where we used to sit and watch the ducks. My mind replayed that final image over and over until it was all I could see. When I finally parked in front of his best friend's house, I didn't think, I just got out. His truck was in the driveway. He opened the door with that easy half-smile he always wore, but it faltered when he saw my face. We sat in his kitchen, steam rising from the mugs he'd placed between us. I slid the photo across the table. He studied it longer than I expected. "That's not good," he said quietly. I told him about the envelope, the lack of note, the absence of explanation. He nodded, but I could see his jaw tightening, his eyes shifting between me and the image. "I've never seen her," he said. And I believed him. We talked about my husband's upcoming trip to Charlotte, how maybe I could use the time to think, to figure out if this meant what I feared it did. His voice was calm, but there was a current underneath, something restless. When I left, he walked me to the door. As I stepped out onto the porch, he reached for my hand. Just a simple gesture, meant for comfort, but something in the way our eyes met made the air feel unsteady. By the time I got home, the street lights were flickering on. My husband was watching a football game in the living room, shouting at the TV as if it could hear him. I slipped upstairs unnoticed, the photo still burning in my purse like a live coal. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the mail slot clattering. I padded down the hallway, still in my robe, and picked up the small bundle of envelopes. And there it was again, another manila envelope, identical to the first. I opened it right there in the hallway. Inside was a single photo, me, from last night, on his porch. His hand holding mine. The exact angle I'd seen from my own eyes, captured like a secret I hadn't yet decided to keep. I stood in the hallway, barefoot on the cold hardwood, staring down at the photo like it had teeth. My hand was still holding the envelope, its flap fluttering slightly with the breeze from the vent. A moment ago I had been half asleep, sleepwalking through a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. Now, I was wide awake. Whoever had taken this picture had to have been watching us. The angle was too precise, too deliberate, not a coincidence, not a mistake. The first instinct I had was to run. Not physically, not yet, but mentally. To dismiss it, fold it up, bury it under the sink with the old tax forms and forgotten warranties. But I knew I wouldn't. I took the photo, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. The glass trembled against the counter as I set it down. He hadn't texted. He hadn't called. But that wasn't surprising. We hadn't spoken since I left his porch last night. I wasn't sure what I'd even say if I called him. What could I ask that wouldn't sound like blame? And yet, I felt the need to see his face, to know that what happened, what almost happened, hadn't all been in my head. By 10 a.m., my husband was packed and wheeling his suitcase toward the car. "Charlotte traffic's gonna be brutal," he muttered, already fiddling with his Bluetooth earpiece. He kissed my cheek absently, like someone touching a lucky token before a poker hand, and was gone. As soon as his taillights disappeared past the oak tree at the end of the cul-de-sac, I grabbed the envelope and got in my car. I didn't text. I didn't warn. I just drove. When I pulled up to the familiar house, the front door was already open, screen door swinging lightly. He stood inside the frame, as if expecting me. Neither of us spoke as I stepped in. The house smelled like coffee and old cedar, safe smells, quiet smells. I pulled the photo from my coat pocket and handed it to him without a word. He took it, turned it toward the light, and paused. I watched his face as he processed it. Not panic. Not guilt. Confusion. "Someone followed you," he said after a long silence. "Or us." He placed the photo on the coffee table between us like a playing card. "That's from last night. From this porch. Which means whoever it is, they're close." I didn't sit. I couldn't. The air in the house felt thick now, like fog before a storm. I walked to the window and stared at the quiet street. The mail truck passed by slowly, the driver waving like always. Everything looked so normal. "You think he's behind this?" he asked. I turned to him sharply. "You think my husband hired someone to spy on me? On us?" "I don't know," he said, carefully, like every word might detonate something. "But someone wants you to feel watched." I let the silence hang. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the block. Then I said the thing neither of us wanted to voice. "What if it's someone trying to make this happen?" He looked at me. "Make what happen?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. It was almost noon when we sat in the kitchen. Rain had begun to patter lightly against the window. He poured bourbon into two mismatched mugs. The sound of the liquid hitting ceramic felt too loud. "I don't feel guilty," I said. It came out flat, honest. "I should. But I don't." "I don't either," he said. There was nothing else said for a while. Just the ticking of the old clock and the rain getting heavier. I looked at him, really looked. He had lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. A tiredness that mirrored mine. Then we kissed. We pulled apart quickly. Not because we had to. Because we both knew what it meant. I left not long after. The rain had stopped, but the sky still looked uncertain. I drove home slower than usual, unsure if I wanted to be seen, or if I was hoping someone would see me. As I opened the door and stepped inside, something felt wrong. The quiet was too complete. The house should have echoed, it always did, but now it was heavy, padded, like sound had been stolen from it. Then I saw it. A suitcase. His suitcase. Sitting by the stairs, the one he had wheeled out just hours before. His coat was slung over the banister, his keys in the dish. He hadn't gone. He never left. From the kitchen, I heard the familiar hiss of the espresso machine. My heart climbed into my throat as I walked forward, each step loud on the floorboards. He turned from the counter, coffee in hand, wearing the same travel polo he'd left in. Trip got cancelled, he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Figured I'd work from home. My fingers curled slightly at my side, still wet from the rain. I nodded, forcing a small smile. Of course. He sipped his coffee, not taking his eyes off me. You were out? Target, I said automatically. Again, he asked, voice light, but there was something behind it. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came. So I nodded. The kettle whistled softly from the stove. He turned away to pour the water, and I took that moment to breathe, to remind myself to blink. He hadn't gone. He'd been here. All day. Which meant he had seen everything. Or worse, someone had shown him. He didn't say much the rest of the morning. That wasn't unusual, but now every word felt weighed, every silence stretched too long. He worked from the kitchen counter, laptop open, headphones in, nodding occasionally to whatever voice spoke through his screen. I pretended to clean. The same corner of the sink, over and over again. I couldn't look at him. Couldn't ask what I wanted to ask. Did he see me leave this morning? Did he see where I went? Did he know something? By noon, I found myself walking out the front door without a destination. I just needed movement. The walls felt like they were listening. I ended up at the town library, somewhere I hadn't stepped into in years. It smelled exactly the same, old books and lemon cleaner, and no one questioned why I sat in the back corner, staring out the rain-dusted window with a book I didn't even open. I stayed there until nearly 3. When I got back, he was gone. A note on the fridge read, "At Dad's. Back for dinner." I stared at it too long, wondering if it was a test or a message. I tucked the note into my coat pocket and walked to the living room. Then I saw it. Another envelope. This one wasn't in the mailbox or by the door. It was on the kitchen island, right where my purse had been that morning. No name. No address. The same dull manila paper. I opened it with a sharp inhale. Inside was a single photo again. Different this time. It was me. Standing in the grocery store parking lot yesterday. Looking into my rearview mirror. From behind. My shoulders were hunched, my hand frozen on the steering wheel. I didn't even remember that moment, but someone had been close enough to capture it. I dropped the photo on the counter like it burned. By 4:30, I was knocking on his door again. I hadn't even texted. I just drove. His truck was in the driveway. Lights were on. But he didn't answer. I rang twice more. Still nothing. I stepped off the porch, turning to leave, when I heard the door creak open. He stood there, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I didn't hear you," he mumbled. "Laid down after lunch. Didn't expect." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw my face. I handed him the new photo. His brows pulled tight as he scanned it. "This one was in my house," I said. "Not mailed. Not delivered. Just there. Your husband? He was at his dad's. Left a note. We stared at the photo together in his kitchen, both of us breathing too shallow. He pinched the bridge of his nose and said, "This isn't about catching us. This is about pushing you." Pushing me where? He didn't answer. He just looked at me. The conversation slowed, but the electricity didn't. Something between us felt unstable now. Not romantic. Not even intimate. Just dangerous. We kissed. And then I left. I didn't say anything when I got home. He wasn't back yet. The house felt stiff with quiet. I sat on the edge of the guest bed with the photo in my hands, and then finally did something I hadn't done since the first envelope appeared. I burned it. Right there in the bathroom sink. Watched the edges curl inward, blacken, vanish. It didn't feel like victory. Just something necessary. Dinner was a blur. We barely spoke. He talked about his father's bad back, about traffic near the 485 bypass. I nodded at all the right moments. My food tasted like dust. That night, I stayed awake long after he started snoring. I stared at the ceiling, then at the shadows moving across the bedroom wall. Something about the silence now felt cruel. The next morning came too fast. And too loud. My husband was already dressed, shoes on, bag in hand. He was heading to work early, some site visit near Raleigh. I walked him to the door and watched him pull away. He didn't kiss me this time. He always did. Even distracted, he always did. Once the street was clear, I called the only person I could. He picked up on the third ring. "I can't do this again today," I said before he even spoke. "I need to breathe." Just breathe. He didn't argue. "Come over." But not here. Not this house. It's too visible. I knew what he meant. Whoever was doing this, they knew our rhythms. Our places. We needed to break the pattern. We agreed to meet at the walking trail near the edge of town. The one that curved behind the old golf course, through the pine woods. No cameras. No neighbors. Just wind and dirt and pine needles. It was cold out. Windy. But not unpleasant. The kind of cold that kept your skin awake. We walked in silence for the first few minutes. Every sound felt amplified. Leaves. Birds. Our own footsteps. "Do you think it's him?" I finally asked. He stopped walking. "I don't know. But if it is, he's not angry. He's waiting." "For what?" "For you to choose." The words made me shiver, but not from the wind. I turned away, walking ahead of him. "I never planned this," I said. This wasn't supposed to be anything. It was just confusion. Until it wasn't. I know. I feel like I'm unraveling. You're not. You're waking up. I didn't answer. Just kept walking until the woods thinned. We parted at the parking lot with no goodbye. I drove home with the windows down, trying to clear the air from my lungs. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found on the front steps when I got there. Not an envelope this time. Not a photo. A frame. Black. Heavy. Standing upright. And inside it, a photo I hadn't seen before. Me. Kissing him. Not almost. Not close. But clearly. Undeniably. Professionally printed. Clean. Centered. The kind of photo someone would take to make a point. I stood frozen on the steps, staring at it. There was no note. No markings. No message. Just the image. And the impossible weight of knowing. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. I didn't touch the framed photo. I didn't scream, or cry, or throw it to the ground like you see in movies. I stood there, frozen on the porch, the breeze teasing the hem of my coat, as the weight of it all settled on me like concrete dust. The image was clean. Lit well. Centered. The kind of shot you take when you want to make sure there's no confusion. No denial. No room for misinterpretation. I opened the door slowly and carried the frame inside, careful not to smudge the glass. I placed it face down in the hall closet behind a stack of board games we hadn't touched in years. And then I stood there, in the dark of that narrow space, breathing through my nose until the shaking stopped. By the time I composed myself, my husband's car was already back in the driveway. He walked through the door with a worn look, tired, but not suspicious. He kissed me on the cheek, just like always. His breath smelled faintly of coffee and mints. Meetings were useless, he muttered. I should have just stayed home. We had dinner like any other night. Meatloaf, canned green beans, those rolls he always burned a little on purpose because he said it gave them character. We barely spoke. The silence wasn't tense, it was normal. Too normal. That was the part that frightened me. Later, in bed, he scrolled through his phone while I stared at the ceiling. We didn't touch. We hadn't in weeks. Not since the first photo. Even before that, things had been thinning. Quietly, like the way paint fades when no one's watching. I got up around midnight and stood at the kitchen window with a glass of water. The street was empty, the lights humming faintly like a warning I couldn't quite hear. Something was shifting. Not just around me, in me. I didn't know what I was becoming, but I knew it wasn't who I used to be. In the morning, I left a note on the counter and drove. I didn't have a destination, only direction. My hands moved on the wheel without instruction, following a path my mind hadn't planned. The lake was 2 hours away. We hadn't been there in years, not since that summer we rented a cabin with a broken screen door and drank wine on the dock while cicadas hummed around us. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was there because I needed space that didn't belong to anyone. I parked behind the inn, the gravel crunching under my tires. It looked just like I remembered, small, with chipping paint and windows that still had lace curtains. I went to the front desk and asked for a room. The woman didn't ask questions. I paid in cash. I texted him the room number. No greeting. No context. Just numbers. 10 minutes later, I heard a knock. He stepped inside without speaking. We looked at each other, not saying a word. There was nothing left to explain. We spent night together. In the morning, the light was too bright. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, vibrating like a hornet in a jar. I ignored it for a while, until the screen lit up again, 12 missed calls, all from my husband. I sat on the edge of the bed with the sheet wrapped around my shoulders, staring at the numbers. He never called that much. Even when his mother had fallen and broken her hip, he hadn't called me 12 times. My heart pounded as I called him back. "Where are you?" he asked, voice level. "Just driving," I replied. There was a pause. "Are you okay?" "Yes." "Okay," he said. "Drive safe." The line clicked. No questions. No accusations. Just silence. Which was somehow worse. We drove back to town together. The air in the car was heavy but not uncomfortable. He didn't ask if I would come back. I didn't ask if he expected me to. We just drove. When I got home, the house was silent. Too clean. too untouched. A still life version of what it used to be. I walked through it slowly, half expecting something to jump out at me. But everything was as I had left it, until I reached the kitchen. There, sitting on the counter like a centerpiece, was another photo. Same frame. Same size. But this one was different. It wasn't candid. It wasn't recent. It was a photo from years ago. From our wedding. I was smiling, holding his hand, looking up at him with a light in my eyes I didn't recognize anymore. He was looking at me like I was the only person in the world. There was a sticky note on the glass. It said, "Don't forget what you chose." I stood motionless, the note flapping gently in the draft from the vent. No envelope. No signature. Just the frame and a memory I hadn't asked to remember. I didn't know if he left it. I didn't know if he found the other photo, the kiss. Or if someone had delivered this one, too. But I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. This was no longer about secrets. It was about consequences. I didn't move for a long time after finding the wedding photo. The sticky note fluttered once more in the breath of the vent, then lay still. Don't forget what you chose. It felt less like a threat and more like a whisper. A reminder, soft, almost gentle, that the line I'd crossed wasn't just real. It was permanent. I wanted to believe it came from him. That this was his way of processing, of responding without violence or confrontation. That maybe, in his own quiet way, he was offering a path back. A chance to feel remorse. To confess. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a breadcrumb. It was a mirror. I put the frame under the guest bed. I didn't throw it out. Couldn't. But I also couldn't leave it where it could be found again. Out of sight didn't mean out of mind, it just meant hidden long enough for me to pretend I could function. Around 4 that afternoon, he came home early. Again. He said something vague about early dismissals at the site, that the contractor forgot to order materials. I just nodded, offered him coffee. We sat across from each other at the kitchen island like co-workers in a too-silent office. He mentioned he wanted to go away for the weekend. Just us. Asheville maybe. Change of air, he said. Might be good for both of us. I nodded again, but I felt the pressure build behind my eyes like altitude sickness. A getaway? Now? After all this? I told him I'd think about it. He said nothing more. That night, I went to see him. The other him. I told him everything. About the new photo. The note. The sudden suggestion of a weekend away. He sat on his porch step, elbows on knees, head down. He knows, he said. Or he's trying to see if you'll admit it. You think he's testing me? He shrugged. Or maybe he's giving you a last chance. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. Just stared out across the street, where kids were playing basketball in a driveway, shouting and laughing like the world hadn't shifted beneath them. We can't do this again, I said quietly. He looked at me, and for the first time since it all began, he looked tired. Then don't come back. I didn't respond. Just turned and walked to my car. But I didn't drive home. Not right away. I sat there in the dark, staring at the glove compartment, hands on the steering wheel. Everything in me was trying to reconcile two versions of myself, the woman who used to host Sunday dinners, and the woman now living moment to moment between glances, silences, and secrets. The next morning was a blur. Coffee. Shower. Pretending to read. My husband was already dressed and out the door before I even made it downstairs. I stared at the calendar pinned to the wall beside the fridge. He'd circled the weekend. Asheville, U.S., in his handwriting. I texted the friend. Just 2 words, need out. No reply came. Not that day. Not the next. By Thursday, I was pacing. I didn't know if he was ghosting me or giving me what I asked for. But the silence was louder than any confrontation. Friday morning, as I packed a bag for the trip, I could barely zip it closed. My hands weren't cooperating, and my throat felt like it had been wrapped in cotton. My husband was already actually humming, as he loaded the car. He hadn't done that in years. The drive to Asheville was quiet, but not tense. Scenic highways. Billboard signs for antique shops and roadside fudge. He pointed out a hawk circling over a field once. I nodded and pretended to smile. Every so often, he'd glance over at me. Not suspicious. Just watchful. The inn was charming in that forced, Pinterest way. Wrought iron railings. Brick fireplaces that probably hadn't worked in a decade. The receptionist handed us a room key with 2 small chocolates on top. I almost laughed. We didn't do much that day. Walked through downtown. Ate at a place with mismatched chairs and a live guitarist in the corner. The food was bland, but I kept pretending it was all charming. I had grown used to pretending. That night, as I was brushing my teeth, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same one from the wedding photo. She had creases where smiles used to be. Her eyes were too alert, like she was waiting for something, or someone, to appear behind her. I walked back into the room. He was sitting on the bed, flipping through a brochure about local hikes. I booked us a massage for tomorrow, he said without looking up. At that spa you used to like. Figured we could use it. I nodded. Then he reached into his suitcase and pulled out a manila envelope. My heart stopped. He held it out to me casually. This came in the mail yesterday. Thought maybe you should see it. I took it slowly, the room suddenly too warm, too loud. Inside were 4 photos. All of them of me. Different days. Different clothes. Same expression, distant, distracted. One was at the grocery store. One through the window at home. One while I was walking into the library. One at the lake. My mouth opened, but no words came. I didn't open it, he said, calmly. Didn't know if it was personal. My hand tightened around the envelope. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I thought it was junk, he added. Until I saw the return address. I looked up. He wasn't smiling. There wasn't one, he said. He leaned back against the headboard and closed his eyes, like the conversation was over. I stood there, frozen, the photos clutched in my hand. But there was something he hadn't said. Something deliberate in the way he delivered it. He knew. Or worse. He was the one sending them. But I couldn't ask. Because if I asked, if he confirmed it, everything would change. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The next morning, I opened my eyes to the sound of birds, not alarms. The air in the Asheville Inn was still, the kind of quiet that's unnerving rather than peaceful. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning just slowly enough to seem uncertain of its purpose. My husband was already up. The bathroom door was closed. I could hear the soft rush of water, the rhythmic splash of someone washing their face. I reached for my bag, pulled out the envelope from the night before. 4 photos. 4 versions of me, taken without permission, from impossible angles, during moments I hadn't even remembered happening. A walk, a glance, a pause. All of them mundane, yet none of them felt harmless. The 4th one, the one at the lake, was the worst. Not because it was explicit. but because I knew exactly what I had done after that frame. I wasn't even in the act, just leaning against the wooden railing, but knowing what had followed made it unbearable to look at. He stepped out of the bathroom, towel slung over his shoulder. "Breakfast downstairs ends at 10, he said. I nodded. My voice had gone dormant again. He seemed content with silence, or at least unbothered by it. We ate on the patio. Scrambled eggs, overcooked bacon, those paper-thin waffles every roadside and tries to pass off as homemade. Around us, couples chatted about hikes, museums, antiques. We didn't speak. The only sounds between us were the clink of cutlery and the low hum of a couple arguing 3 tables away. When we got back to the room, he handed me a small envelope. Not manila this time. White. Business card size. "What's this?" I asked. "Spa appointment. Noon. Just for you." I looked at him. He was already sitting on the edge of the bed, flipping channels. "You're not coming?" He shook his head. "Figured you could use a break. From everything." I didn't argue. Didn't ask more. Just nodded and took the card. At noon, I walked the short distance down the hill to the spa. It was the same place we'd visited years ago. Same faded floral wallpaper, same receptionist with overdone nails and a name tag that said Becky, smiley face. They took me to a room with dim lighting and lavender-scented towels. The masseuse barely spoke. I didn't want her to. For the first 20 minutes, I tried to relax. Tried to let the pressure on my shoulders melt the things I wasn't saying. But then my mind started racing. What was he doing back at the room? Was he going through my things? Was he testing me? Afterward, I walked straight to the bakery across the street. Bought a loaf of sourdough and a slice of something with pecans and dark molasses. I needed to feel like I was in control of something, even if it was just a pastry. Back in the room, he wasn't there. His phone was gone. His shoes were gone. His suitcase was still zipped at the corner of the room, untouched since yesterday. I waited. 1 hour. Then 2. By 5 p.m., I wasn't even pretending to be calm. I paced. I opened the window. I called the front desk. No, they hadn't seen him. No, he hadn't left a message. I walked the downtown blocks twice. Past every bar, every boutique, every tourist trap with old-timey photos and overpriced hot sauce. Nothing. By the time I returned, he still wasn't back. I sat on the edge of the bed, the sky turning pink through the window. I felt suspended in some version of reality where logic didn't apply. Then I noticed the envelope. Sitting right where my phone had been. White. Same size. No handwriting. No logo. I picked it up with a trembling hand, heart pounding, stomach turning on itself. Inside was a photo. Different this time. It was taken in this very room. Of me. Asleep. The frame was angled slightly, as if someone had taken it while standing in the doorway. My head was turned on the pillow. My hand hung off the edge. I wore the same robe I had on the first night. I dropped the photo. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I yanked the door open, ran into the hallway barefoot, nearly colliding with a maid pushing a cart. Did anyone come into my room today? I asked, breathless. She blinked at me, startled. Only housekeeping. Just me. No one else? No man? Tall, dark hair, navy jacket? She shook her head slowly. I nodded like that meant something, then turned back inside. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and something else, something faintly metallic. I checked my phone. Still no texts. No calls. It was almost 7 when I heard the key in the door. He walked in casually, holding a bag from a barbecue joint up the road. "They took forever," he said. "Figured we'd just eat here." I didn't say anything. Just stared. He unpacked the food onto napkins. Ribs. Slaw. Cornbread. All things I used to love. "You okay?" he finally asked. "You left," I said. He nodded. "Just walked. Needed air." "For 7 hours?" He shrugged. "Sometimes things need space." I stood, picked up the envelope and held it out. "Was this you?" He took it. Pulled out the photo. Studied it. Then looked up at me and said nothing. Not denial. Not confirmation. Just silence. And then he smiled. Not warm. Not cold. Just still. "I think you should get some rest," he said. And he walked into the bathroom and closed the door. The sound of the faucet came on behind it. I stood there, alone again, holding a photo of myself I hadn't taken, in a room I thought I had control over. But nothing about this was mine anymore. Nothing ever had been. I barely slept that night. The bed creaked every time I shifted, but I stayed mostly still, eyes fixed on the shadowed ceiling while he breathed evenly beside me. I could hear the distant hum of cars on the road below, the occasional wind brushing against the windowpane. Everything around me was quiet, too quiet, but inside it was all movement. Loops of doubt, fear, and a creeping realization I couldn't yet name. The photo lay face down on the nightstand. I hadn't touched it since he handed it to me, but I could feel its presence the way you sense someone watching you from across a room. By morning, I felt brittle. My skin didn't fit quite right. My mouth tasted of copper and anxiety. He got dressed slowly, packed deliberately, as if there was no rush. I watched him fold each shirt, zip each pocket, check the room twice. Not because he was forgetful, but because he wanted me to notice that he was careful. Intentional. The drive back home was long. Not in time, but in silence. We didn't speak. Didn't even try to fake conversation. He listened to sports radio. I stared out the window at the blur of trees and exit signs. When we got home, the house felt colder than I remembered. He went straight to the bedroom, left his bag at the door, and muttered something about catching up on emails. I nodded and wandered to the kitchen. The windows were clean. Too clean. I didn't remember washing them before we left. By late afternoon, I needed air. I needed something ordinary. I drove to the supermarket, the same one I'd been photographed at before. I half expected someone to follow me. To feel a presence. But there was nothing. Just the whir of carts and mothers with toddlers, and an old man in a navy cap who held the door for me on the way out. Still, I felt watched. That evening, I texted him. The one I wasn't supposed to. I didn't ask how he was. I just said, "Can we meet?" No reply. Hours passed. I refreshed the screen. Nothing. Around 9, my husband brought out the old photo album from the hall closet. The one we hadn't touched in years. He placed it on the coffee table like a prop. A test. "Thought it might be nice," he said. "To remember some good things." I didn't want to play along. But I sat beside him anyway. Page after page of us in better times, laughing, sunburned, dressed in matching red, white, blue on the 4th of July. I smiled at the appropriate moments. Commented on the haircut he used to have. Pointed at the restaurant we'd loved on our 2nd anniversary. Then I turned the page and froze. Tucked between two clear plastic sleeves was a photo that didn't belong. One I'd never seen before. It was me, standing in the doorway of the lakeside inn. Wearing the robe. My hair was slightly damp. My expression, soft, unguarded. It wasn't a flattering picture. It wasn't posed. It wasn't meant to be seen. I stared at it, hard hammering. He didn't say anything. Just turned the page. I didn't. I left the photo in place. My fingers trembled as I smoothed the plastic back over it. He smiled faintly. Funny what turns up in old things, huh? I couldn't breathe. He closed the album, got up, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Asheville's cancelled. I've already packed your things." Then he disappeared down the hallway without another word. I sat on the couch for a full 10 minutes before I stood. My suitcase was by the door. Fully packed. My coat draped neatly over the handle. My purse beside it, zipped ready. There was no anger in his voice. No demand. No accusation. Just finality. He didn't slam any doors. Didn't shout. Didn't ask where I had gone, or who I had become. And that was what undid me. Because indifference, not rage, is what truly ends things. Outside, the street was dark. No porch lights. No neighbors visible. I stepped out into the quiet, the suitcase wheels dragging behind me like anchors. I didn't know where I was going. Only that it couldn't be here. I drove for hours. Through empty roads and blinking intersections. The town fell away in the rearview mirror, until I no longer recognized the signs. Eventually, I stopped at a roadside motel. Cheap. Dimly lit. The kind of place you forget the name of immediately after leaving. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions. I paid in cash. Room 4. The key was metal, attached to a green tag that said, "Have a nice stay." The room smelled like bleach and old carpet. The bed was stiff, the curtains faded. I sat on the edge, staring at the wall, trying to feel something. Anything. And then, a knock. Not loud. Just 2 quick taps. I froze. Another knock. A pause. Then silence. I opened the door. He was standing there. Not my husband. Him. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We sat on opposite beds, the hum of the ceiling fan the only sound between us. "I saw your message," he said eventually. I nodded. "You didn't answer." I didn't know if I should. I looked at him. His face was tired, older than it had been weeks ago. But it held something else, too. A knowing. A weight. "I don't know what to do now," I admitted. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. A small envelope. White. No handwriting. He handed it to me. I didn't open it. "Someone left it on my porch," he said. "Yesterday. No one saw anything." My hands shook as I peeled it open. Inside was a single photo. Me. Standing on my porch. Suitcase beside me. Just like tonight. But it had a timestamp. 24 hours ago. I flipped the photo. On the back, in red ink, just one sentence. They both knew. You never did. I dropped the photo. The motel phone rang. I stared at it, breath trapped in my chest. Then walked toward it, one slow step at a time. And everything else fell silent. The phone rang only once before I pulled the cord from the wall. It dropped limp against the carpet, its plastic body swinging slightly, then resting in silence. I stood over it, heart still thundering, fists clenched, the photo on the floor beside me. They both knew. You never did. I hadn't turned to look at him. He hadn't moved since I opened the door. Still sitting on the motel bed across from me, elbows on his knees, staring down at the floor like it held the answers. He didn't ask about the phone. He didn't reach for the photo. He just stayed still, like the air had become too thick to move through. I picked it up. Studied it again. The timestamp was yesterday. 24 hours before I stood in that exact spot, suitcase in hand, mouth slightly open as if I'd just realized I was being photographed. But I hadn't. Whoever had taken it had been close. Very close. I looked up from the photo, my voice barely audible. What does that mean? They both knew? He didn't answer. I stepped closer. You said you didn't know. You told me you were just trying to protect me. But you knew. His gaze didn't meet mine. Not everything. I crouched in front of him, photo shaking between my fingers. Then tell me what you did know. He finally looked up. There was no anger in his eyes. No guilt. Just weariness. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. That's not an answer. I didn't want to be part of this, he said slowly. But I saw it starting long before you did. Saw what? Your marriage ending. I took a breath. You helped it end. I didn't plan that. But you didn't stop it. He stood abruptly and turned away. I wasn't the one who put that envelope on your porch. Then who did? He hesitated, shoulders rising with tension, then turned back to me. You need to understand something. Your husband, he's not the man you think he is. The words felt rehearsed. Convenient. I shook my head. This isn't about him. It's about us. About what we did. He stepped toward me. No. It's about what he knew, before either of us said a word. I stared at him, heart caught between disbelief and something colder. You're saying he set this up? I'm saying, he knew. And he waited. For what? He didn't answer. I felt something collapse in me, not from grief, not even betrayal, but exhaustion. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, the wallpaper faded to a greenish tan that used to be beige. You said you didn't want to be part of this. But you were. I was. Then why are you here now? Because I thought you'd be alone. I stood again, pacing now, adrenaline surging. So what happens next? Do I go back home and pretend this never happened? You go back to your life and we both just live with it? He didn't speak. Outside, the wind had picked up. A tree branch scraped against the motel window with a long, aching squeal. It sounded like something alive trying to get in. I pulled open the motel door and stepped outside. The parking lot was empty. No cars but mine and his. The night air smelled like rain and pavement. I walked a slow circle around the building, the gravel crunching under my shoes. That's when I noticed it. A black car. Parked across the street in the shadows between two trees. Engine off. No movement. But it hadn't been there before. I froze. Watched. No one got out. No lights turned on. Just stillness. I backed toward the room, slowly. The door was still open. He stood in the doorway now, watching me. There's someone out there, I said. He didn't look surprised. Just nodded once and stepped outside to see for himself. We both stared at the car. Still nothing. Then the interior light blinked on for a split second, just long enough to see a silhouette in the front seat. Not looking at us. Looking down. As if reviewing something. A phone. Or a photo. Then the light went off again. I looked at him. Do you recognize it? No. Then why don't you look scared? He didn't respond. I turned back toward the room and grabbed my bag. I'm not staying here. He followed me to the car. Where are you going? I don't know. Do you want me to come? I don't know. I slid into the driver's seat. He stood outside the car, waiting for an answer I couldn't give. I turned the key. That's when I saw it. A photo, tucked under my windshield wiper. I stepped out, yanked it free, and turned it over. It was blank. Just blank photo paper. Not a single image. No writing. No stamp. But the reverse side had the same timestamp format as all the others. Tomorrow. Tomorrow's date. Same hour. Same minute. 9:42 a.m. I checked my phone. It was 9:41. I turned slowly. Across the street, the black car was gone. No sound. No movement. Just an empty patch of gravel where it had been seconds ago. I looked at him. He looked at me. And for the first time since this began, I felt truly afraid. Not of what had happened. But of what hadn't yet.